All right, so this is great. This is the end of the journey of this massive task of cleaning up a shoe to the highest level possible. Putting in all this work on the front end, all the preparation, all the, hard looking for errors and mistakes and things we want to fix or improve and update. All that has culminated in this final perfect image of this shoe. And, sometimes you don't realize you're at the end until you're right at the end, and it's time to step back and just sort of, bask in the glory of this fantastic and painful process that you just went through that was made much less painful because you followed this system. Can you imagine going through this whole process, not knowing these steps and having to sort of fish around to find out what the next thing is? The part of this process that makes it, bearable and even pretty satisfying is that you can always rely on the steps to go through so that you always know what the next thing is. And even if you don't complete one of the steps completely, even if you leave stuff to be done later, you followed this system and created this structure where that is completely possible to do later. If you miss something, you're not locked in. So at this stage, because I've followed the steps, because I've set up my file in this way, I have complete freedom to do anything I want creatively with this shoe. It's prepped in the best, most highest level possible to provide that level of creative freedom now without thinking about any of these technical things that we've tackled in this, systematic and effective process. For instance, I could go in here to, the base and just bring up a hue sat layer and simply start shifting the hue of the shoe to create a completely different body colorway. Just to be able to do that without having to think about it is pretty fantastic. And that's exactly what I want to see in a working file that I create, or maybe in a working file that I would need to pick up from one of my colleagues who maybe goes on vacation and I need to help him out. So if we're all on the same standard and follow the same process, it helps to not only preserve a really high standard of quality for ourselves, but if we need to work with a team, this is exactly the way your studio should be working, every single person, so everyone knows what to expect if they need to help each other out. So at this stage, we're ready to move on to the creative exploration because we've got everything tidied up, everything finished, and the next thing we need to do is check in with our notes, our conversation that we had with Adam Levy about his creative ideas. And the next step we're going to look at is setting up the background to be more aligned with his creative direction, and we can start working on all of the color work, the integration, and our overall mood and grade. So this is really now stepping in to the fun part where we have complete freedom to do whatever we want with this image. You're probably breathing a breath of fresh air now that we're talking about moving into the more creative stuff. I am. I always like this part because I know that I've spent all this time doing all this hardcore procedural retouching, and I don't have to worry about that really at all anymore, and I can move into doing the color. So it's time to step back and remember what we talked about with Adam, check our notes, but more so let's take a look at the rough comp that he sent over to me. So lots of times you're going to get a rough comp from your client, whether it's the photographer or creative at the agency or designer at the end client. They're going to send you some form of rough comp or reference. In this case, since Adam is really good at Photoshop, he is able to put together a much more developed comp that shows us all the layers. He was really mindful of keeping these keeping the file numbers in here, the layers named with the actual file numbers that they are on the drive. That is super helpful if your photographer or client is mindful of that. It's going to really speed up your process because you know what selects that they chose for different things. We can see that he put some light in here. He put the lights coming through the holes in. He used 16518 for that, which is really cool that we can reference that. And it looks like he used an alternative exposure for the heel right there, which yeah, it looks like it did a little bit to brighten that up. But it's great to get these files. One thing to be aware of, and this is how photographers are going to work. They're going to work fast and loose. So you can see all these junky edges here. This is not, something you want to ship, right? Because they knock this out super quick. They need to be able to move fast and think on their feet to get this creative stuff done, because sort of the same process that we go through, where we're compartmentalizing all the procedural technical retouching from the creative stuff. Photographer has to do the same thing. They don't have time to be super creative, super procedural and technical, because they need to focus on the creative. That's our job. That's what they pay us for. So by no means is this something that they're going to ship. So in addition to that, they're going to use techniques to adjust color that aren't things that we want to use. Don't take your rough comp layer work from your photographer and drop that into your file. This is just for reference. You need to know how to take what they've done and recreate it using sound, reliable methods that don't mess up the file, that don't introduce banding or artifacts or lose information. You need to do that yourself while recreating what they've done in their file. Occasionally you'll find something that they've done that is non-destructive, but in general they're going to make big moves that create big creative changes, but are not viable in the retouching method and system that we want to use. We want to always protect all of our pixels and not lose anything or destroy anything. So that's your guiding principle. Use the comp for reference, not for work. But we can see that he's done a great job of achieving a really nice bright orange in the background. He used selective color. We'll probably use a different method, and I'll show you how. He looks like he's brightened up some areas using curves, but overall we see what he's done and what he wants to achieve. Now, with my file, I definitely want to get this background color in so I can see how everything works together. I don't want to do any more color work or grading on the shoe until I get this sort of cohesive visual environment at least set up. So I'm going to go back and start working on the background right now. All right, let's get started. I'm going to take a look at the base. So we put everything in our shoe group that's all masked up there. So we can't see any of the background now because it's all within that mask. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the base layer, get it out of the layer group by just dragging it down until you see that double line there. And I'm going to close up our shoe group. So we're a little bit more tidied up now. Let's turn off the shoe. So there's our old shoe underneath. There's our before and after, which I always love switching back and forth to. It makes me feel good. So I'm going to rasterize the base layer because I don't want to keep it as a smart object because I want to start breaking it apart. So here's our base. I want to take this shadow and I want to ditch the rest of this stuff. So this was shot on some kind of seamless, or paper. We can see creases in it. And if we zoom into 100%, we can see a little bit of tooth, but a whole lot of junk, and it looks like Adam, ate French fries on this. And there's like little grease stains and spots and stuff. So I don't want to even deal with cleaning this up. That would just take a long time, and it's not worth anything because it's just a flat color. So we can recreate that. When I look at these things, I go, this is basically just made out of a single color and some grain to give it a feeling of surface. So there's no way that I'm going to clean something like that up. Now the shadow has some information in it in the edges that I kind of like. I could recreate those, but I could also really just use the shadow from here if I extract it. So I know I want to pull out that shadow. This is a common process that I go through when I'm thinking about how to do stuff in my file from my original photographic source. I usually don't have a plan in place when I see something initially because there may be a lot of elements. But what I always start with is the process of thinking about how I can just isolate things. This is a thing that I really rely on. If I have a really complicated photograph that I need to do a lot of manipulations to, it can look really daunting, and I can really spend a lot of time having anxiety about how I'm going to do the things I need to do in the image. What I always return to is this sort of mantra of isolate, isolate, isolate. I start figuring out how I can clip stuff out, how I can create masks, how I can remove things from the scene in order to extract other things from the scene. If you just start isolating stuff, a lot of times the sort of fog will clear and you'll find your way through to the end product. Just keep that in mind. It's really, really useful to think in those terms. What I want to do now is isolate this shadow. So I know on this pixel layer, I want to get rid of the shoe. So the next thing I'm going to show you is going to blow your mind. I'm serious. Check this out. I'm going to set a selection from my silo, which I always have in my paths palette. It's fantastic. I'm going to expand this selection by going to select, modify, expand. Let's just guess like 30 pixels. I don't know. We just want to expand the selection beyond the boundary of the shoe so we know that the shoe is completely contained within the selection. So that's good. That gives us a little bit of room because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to let Photoshop do all of our work for us, which I love it whenever I can do that. And this is one of the most magical things that was ever created in Photoshop if it's used right. So in a situation like this, hitting Shift F5 brings up the fill dialog. And there is this magical thing in the fill dialog called Content Aware. And it is really aware of the content that you want to remove when you hit OK. Check this out. That makes me happy. Shoe is disappeared and we didn't have to do anything. So you might think that this is kind of weird in here, but you know what? I don't care about how weird this is because I know that's going to be behind the shoe. All I care about is that that shoe is gone. Keep in mind Content Aware Fill, how totally powerful it is, and you can use this in a lot of different situations to get really quick results. So what I'm going to do now is extract the shadow because I'm using that mindset of just isolate. I did the first step, remove the shoe. The next step, I think I'm going to go into my channels and pull what I call a channel mask. Red, green, blue. In RGB, these are going to have a lot of different, there's going to be variation between these individual channels. I really just want to take the base RGB channel and create a new one. So these are the steps that I use. I actually have an action set up to do this, so it's a little bit faster, but I'll show you what I do. I bring up a new alpha channel. I do image, apply image, and I tell it that I want RGB to go to a new channel with blending mode normal. So just keep all these settings right here to move to create a new channel based on your RGB. Super quick. What I want to do is bring up a curve, and I want to create contrast in this new alpha channel because I want this shadow to be all black and this to be all white, so I can create a really clean mask. So what I can do is use the hand tool. I call it the hand tool, but it's actually a method for targeting different areas of your tonal range in the image. So when I click this hand on, it's going to bring up an eyedropper. I want to set a point. Do you see where the corresponding point is in the curve to this luminosity area? I'm going to set a point right there. And I know I want to change this too, so I'm going to set a point right here. See where that sets that on the curve according to this area of the tone. So now I know that I've targeted the lighter area of the image, and I'm going to brighten it up. Now I don't want to crank it too much because I want to preserve some of the fidelity of what's happening on the edge here. Because if I crank that too hard, it's going to start to eat into that edge, and I don't know if I really like that. So I don't want to push it too far, but I want to get a good separation. That's pretty good. So now I'm going to show you another really useful tool for manipulating masks. These are tools that sort of get forgotten about, or were forgotten as we've moved more into non-destructive editing. They were probably really useful at one stage before we had adjustment layers and stuff like that. But dodge and burn are tools that you should never run on your pixel layers because there are methods such as curves to adjust luminosity in a non-destructive manner. But these tools are incredibly useful for manipulating masks. And what I'm going to do is set the dodge tool up, 40%. I'm going to make sure it's set to highlights because I really only want to adjust the lighter areas of the image. So this is basically the way that I think about the dodge and burn tools now. They are completely and 100% tools that I use to manipulate masks, and I think about them as brushes that are actually curves. Because what they do is they target a tonal area of the image and they either lighten or darken. That sounds exactly like a curve to me. So now I've created a good separation between the shadow and the background. I'm just going to switch to the lasso tool. Make sure it's set to the circular lasso. And I'm just going to select around that. Invert my selection by Command-Shift-I. Fill that with white. That's great. This is all white, but I want this to be black. So let's switch to the burn tool. You could also do this with a curve, but I kind of want to choose the area of the shadow that I paint on because I want to preserve those kind of nice transitional areas at the edge of the shadow that are still somewhat photographic. Because if I destroy those, I'll sort of have to recreate them using a blur. And there's something about this shadow that still has that character of being captured in camera rather than fabricated in Photoshop. And whenever we see information like that, we want to be really sensitive to it because that's the stuff that creates the real, that creates a believable visual construction. So what I did was I inverted that mask because I know that I want to do something with this shadow area and I want to be able to set it as a selection and then as a mask on a new layer group. Oh, I don't want to set that as a solid color. I want to create a new layer group, apply that as a mask. I want to turn off that shadow, turn back on my shoe. Okay, and so this is a really easy way to set up this background. I exited full screen because I want to be able to see Adam's file, because I want to match his background color exactly. And rather than do any like measurements or reading values in my info palette, I'm just going to really take the shortcut, which is totally viable in this situation. I'm going to sample the color in this base color fill layer. I double click on the adjustment layer itself, and I'm just going to sample Adam's background color. Uh-oh, it went to white. You know why I did this? Because Photoshop is not really brilliant when it comes to sampling through layers. So what I did just then, and the reason it did this, you're going to run into this a lot, is because when I set my sample, it actually sampled the active layer in the document, which is this curve and the mask on the curve. So it thinks I wanted to sample white, but I totally didn't. So I'm going to image duplicate merge layers only. So I have a flattened version of Adam's file, and now I can sample his orange color and it'll go right in there. And I can close that flattened version.